Yeah, I think the labor rights situation in the fashion industry, I think we can all agree on that it's still not bad despite 10 years after Rana Plaza. The data from SLCP also shows that 90% of the factories that are currently in a program, and that's um, last year we were already more than 4,000, and this year and again a couple of thousands, but we still see that 90% of the factories there is violations on the basic aspects on wages, working hours, and health and safety on the work floor that is not even in compliance with the local law. And I think compared to other industries, what probably you can say from the fashion industry is that it is very dispersed, complex supply chains, but it's also vulnerable because it is a low cost product in many ways. In the sense, the majority is produced in low cost countries, emerging economies where legislation and enforcement of that legislation is not as developed as we maybe see in other countries. Civil society is less developed. And for that reason, also intrinsically, there are less checks and balances in terms of ensuring that the people who make our clothes have decent working conditions. So I think if we all wanted, it could be controlled. In the sense that we also see, if we compare social conditions with, for instance, which I think is just as important. And you could, if a product, you always want a good quality, and you also want that it's being produced under good conditions and that the people who make our clothes are having proper labor conditions. You could say that that comparison between quality and labor conditions, quality of food products, for instance, can be controlled quite a lot in detail wherever it is produced. But it is coming at a cost. And I think the fact is, are we willing to pay that in terms of consumers, brands, but also others? And if we really would want that, we could make it happen. But the enabling factors need to be included, including, for instance, there is insurance of worker rights and work conditions in the countries where it's being produced, as well as proper purchasing conditions and a healthy relationship between a manufacturer and a brand. One thing maybe I can also add to this is that in the more than 20 years that I'm working now in this industry, it is not always predictable in what country or what region there is a good factory with proper labor conditions, or worse. So I've seen really best example factories in countries where you maybe would not expect it, in Bangladesh or Vietnam or India. And sometimes there's also less good working conditions in countries more in the West. So it's not always black and white, but as mentioned in the previous question, throughout there needs to be a lot of improvement done. Yeah, I think there is, let me first say that the responsibility of improving working conditions is something that is shared, and many parties are involved in that. In the past 25 years, it was mostly the private sector, and there have been many corporate sustainability or corporate social responsibility initiatives, codes of conduct, etc. But I feel that is a proxy, because long term, it is the role of the government to protect the citizens, and that there's proper legislation in place and enforcement, and that should be balanced with a strong civil society. So definitely there is a strong role for local trade unions, as well as there is a strong role that's required from local governments. Yeah, so I think it goes hand in hand. There is the UN guiding principles that declares there is a role for all involved. Protect, respect, and remedy. The role of governments is mostly on protection. Respecting is the private sector, and then remedy is an action for all, including also civil society, so the local trade unions. Um, yeah, difficult question because I think it is much more nuanced than that. In terms of if you just look at the environmental aspect of it, local sourcing is always the best option. But then the reality of fashion is that you want different materials, different qualities for the seasons, the fashion aspect of it. And in the past decades, countries or regions have specialized in a specific product or a specific material. And also, if I look at it from the other side, this is a low entry industry, meaning it provides jobs, and it's in emerging countries often an industry that helps to drive the economy at large. And it provides opportunities for people who otherwise have less job opportunities. So particularly we see that, for instance, with women. So I do think there is a role for shorter supply chains, more maybe local sourced and produced fashion. On the other hand, I think that needs to be a slow transition because we also should think about the people who make it and who can have a good income provided the working conditions are okay, that help them also in their next journey. I really think that Rana Plaza was a turning point, though again, in the past 10 years, we've not progressed as much as we should have. But I am an optimistic person in general, and I think it was a major wake-up call. And it started maybe with, say, the reputational issue. But I also believe that next to that, people saw the other sides of it. So, resilience of global supply chains, and in general, the shared obligation to meet basic human rights. So, to answer this question, I think reputational issues is a trigger, but I believe there are also definitely other factors, and that will bring us much more towards durable systemic change. Yeah, I already mentioned earlier that everyone has their own role and their own responsibilities in solving these big problems. And there are some promising discussions on what we call human rights due diligence, which is a way to really say everyone taking their own responsibilities throughout global supply chains to improve working conditions. I think if this is well implemented, that in a harmonized way, that can really move the needle. And next to that, there I believe also intergovernmental discussions, government to government, can really help. And that is to work on a level playing field in terms of labor legislation. And I believe the ILO conventions really are the baseline for that, and credible data to really understand what are the critical issues in terms of labor conditions in the fashion supply chain, wages, working hours, but also freedom of association. And how is that from region to region different, and what can we really do to um, remediate this and really make the next step in elevating those? maybe it could play a role, but I do believe that systemic change, there is a role for everyone, and these are complex issues that we're discussing here. So I do believe in the role of consumers also. I do believe they need to be educated, but in a holistic approach, as for instance is the human rights due diligence, there is much to be done more than just an on-product hallmark. So the topics are complex, and we shouldn't address it in a too simplistic way. And I, again, as mentioned, I believe there is a role for everyone to play. And that goes beyond just a certification. I believe that brands can really help, and they are a critical party in this discussion. And I think if brands are serious about this, it really starts at the top with embedding a company policy and a management systems to work on this. And that is, say, talking about what do you do to ensure proper labor conditions are in place for where your product is coming from, but also include that in what we call enabling factors, including how do you, what kind of relationship do you have with your manufacturers, with your suppliers, and is that allowing also for them to pay their workers and to provide better working conditions. So with that and anchoring it in policy and management system, the next thing is to identify what are the critical risks in your supply chains. How can you avoid those or reduce the harm? Invest in remediation and in collaborative programs. Track what's improving, track the progress, and communicate about this. This is all about continuous improvement. So it starts with measuring the conditions in your own supply chains, and tools like, for instance, that we provide with the SCP, converged ways of working, can support in having access to credible data, while you refocus on improvement programs. And the issues are, again, really too big to handle by one brand itself. It does require a systemic approach and collaborative actions. So really my call is don't try to just solve it only in your own supply chain, but work with others, with local stakeholders, in order to really improve the labor conditions in your full supply chains.